Hi. So it's taken me a while to compile my thoughts, but I am finally ready to talk about Chapter 1 of Konjiki no Gash 2, aka Zatch Bell 2. It was put up on Manga Dex, the scanlated version by Zatch Bell Gamer, who's a great YouTuber you should all follow. Um, Pretty much the day it came out, it took him and his scanlation partner a while to translate from Japanese, but I think they worked pretty much all day, and they got it done late at night. I think the scan was finished around 3 a.m. that night, and then it was uploaded to MangaDex the next day. So we all got to see it. Um, so I'm just going to get into my thoughts. This is not going to be so much of a review or a reaction. Those might happen in later videos. Um, right now, I don't think there's much reason to talk about like the quality of the story because we've seen so little of it. Do I think it's a good first chapter? Yes, I do. It was exciting. It was cool. I'll talk about that, what I liked about it, very soon. But I certainly won't really be summarizing the events. I'll kind of be going back and forth, and it's not. I'm not going to go into any negatives because that's just not the kind of vibe I want to go for. We're celebrating right now. It's a great thing that we're getting Zatch Bell 2. Um, so I'm just going to start by getting into it. I will be discussing it in roughly the order of events that happen in the chapter, but I'll also be going back and forth with some things. So the really major creative choice that Makoto Raikou made in this chapter is to start things, as they say, in media res, right in the middle of things. We see these Moto kids, they're running from some new threat. Obviously, if you've watched my past videos, you know that I'm looking at my notes here. They're running from some new threat, and we don't really know anything about what happened before this. It's a really good way to start a sequel, if you ask me, especially with a completely new threat, because we're not as confused as the characters. We're actually more confused than the characters. um, we're more confused about what's happening than these Moto kids are, and it's really hitting you. This type of presentation, the darker tone that this series has, or at least this chapter has. I have reason to believe that the tone is gonna become a lot lighter. The original series could get pretty dark and violent, especially in the last arc, which a lot of people haven't really experienced if they're anime only. But this chapter is kind of almost non-stop desperation and despair, which I know people have kind of been joking about. Um, and I think that's sort of what they wanted to accomplish with this chapter, is to get the reader really invested in a new plot, in whatever the plot of the series is going to be, as opposed to starting with some sort of catch up that's like kind of almost devoid of plot and just saying, hey, what are these characters up to? I mean, imagine if that's what we got with this chapter, was sort of reintroducing all these characters that we know. Even if it was just some of the characters, the chapter would end before any actual plot started. So this is a great way to do that, I think, to get you invested. What we're looking at right now is sort of essentially going to be a new story, but they're going to be revealing things about the state of the Momoto world and the old characters over, I would imagine, a very long period of time. And it's going to be both really awesome and also the hardest part of waiting for new chapters, the hardest part of experiencing this story, because we have to wait a month between chapters for the characters we love to show up. But at the same time, if every character gets even a little of the kind of presentation that Kyo got in this chapter, it's going to be really exciting and great. So we have fully new good guys, fully new bad guys. The good guys are cool. They're nice. You feel for them. There's not much to talk about there with them, really. The bad guys are much more interesting. We have this big ugly guy whose name is Wig or Wig. He seems to be a new type of villain, like a new creature, something not of the Momoto world. He can't use spells on his own, and he has to use these spell elements, which we also see the good guys using. And so we see the good guys using these spell elements, and whether they're using these because all Momoto are unable to use spells, or just because these specific Momoto kids are weak, they can't use their magic well, which is something that we heard that Zatch could barely cast spells when he was in the Momoto world. We don't really know. I do think that Ziggy probably got this jewel, this Ganzuko Faru jewel, from Cherish herself. And I also have a hard time believing the Momoto world could be in the state that it seems to be in if all the Momoto we know could still use their spells. So, if, for my money, I think they were all depowered in some way. Maybe that has something to do with the wand that makes Momoto unable to use spells that was in the guidance chapter. I mentioned this in my last video. We don't really know. So, this guy Wig or Wig, I'll call him Wig. He can't use spells, but he can transform into a really big monster, which he does without saying anything. So we kind of know that that's not a spell. And Raiku's immediately diving in with the monsters here. For those of you who haven't read Makoto Raiku's other two main manga, Animal Land and Vector Ball, Wig's monster form is a lot like the monsters from those, where it's sort of this kitchen sink design where just everything is thrown in there. And as a result of this sort of design, a lot of Raiku's monsters tend to look a little silly. I would say this guy's another example of that. He's somewhat imposing, but there's definitely a silliness to him as well. But he's very imposing to the kids and the regular humans in the story. Still, I don't think he's going to last very long. I've been saying this on Discord back and forth for, almost for since we first saw him. I've been saying this, which isn't really a very long time because of how little the wait for this chapter was. I don't think Kyo is going to defeat him in the next chapter, which I'll get to about Kyo's confrontation with him. But I think whenever the first real battle in the series is, it'll probably be with him, and he probably will be defeated. If you ask me, he's just not cool enough to be a big villain. I don't think he has the design of a big villain. He's just this random ugly dude. So we don't know where this guy comes from, but him having both a human form and a monster form is sort of similar to the villains from the manga Vector Ball, Raku's other manga, who were called the Spirit Bodies. They were both enemies and allies in that series. And I'm not saying these guys are Spirit Bodies. I kind of don't think they are. But they might be kind of similar. And in that series, the monsters were possessing the bodies of real people. The human bodies were real people's bodies. I don't think that's what's happening here. I think Wade... I think that those are both his real body, He didn't take over someone else's. He didn't take over Momoto's body. I think his more humanoid body is supposed to look really weird and not really like a Momoto. But Wig actually does have a Momoto helping him, who's named Gil. And we see Gil specifically using a spell by saying the spell, as Momoto normally use it, which I think is to remind the reader that that's how spellcasting normally works in the Momoto world. I think Gil's going to be a really interesting character because he's helping a guy who wants to destroy his kind. And that probably requires quite a bit of backstory to do. Especially, Gorm from the original series was doing that. But, he was a very simple sort of creature. He had a simple backstory. I think we're going to need to go a little bit deeper to explain why this guy Gil is helping these creatures who want to destroy the Momoto. I think there might be other Momoto helping Wig because he has a little booklet that tells him things about the Momoto world. And Gil is right there, I think, when he's reading that. So it doesn't seem like Gil wrote that. So the question of what happened in the Momoto world before the events we see is sort of the really big one of the chapter, and pretty much every other question that you could possibly think of, including if Ted, Cherish Rain, and of course King Zatch Bell are really dead, which I loved that reveal. Just sort of holding that knowledge from us. We know things are in dire straits. We know that Ted and Cherish and Rain are down, possibly dead. But to hear that these kids believe that even the king is dead is that's dire right there. Those are some dire straits. And all the questions we might have are tied into the question of what happened before the story. And I think we're going to see exactly what happened. I don't think it's just going to be like, once Zeri is safe with Kyo, she explains it or something. I think we're going to see pretty detailed flashbacks. I think we're going to see events leading right up to what we saw. I think we're going to see how the Momoto kids got to that transporter, which was apparently made by Rio, which, both makes sense and is a cool sort of layering in of something that was from the first series. I don't know if we'll see this flashback before or after huge events like the villains coming to the Momoto world or the supposed killing of the king, so that specific flashback of what happened to those three kids. I don't know what order we're going to see these past events in. And I don't think we're going to see any of it until Zeri or Zelly and the others are safe with Kyo in the human world. So there's going to be a bit before we get to those flashbacks. So once Zeri and Mippy is the dog and Olmo is the baby, at least those are the tentative names that we think is how they're pronounced. Once they arrive in the human world, there's not too much to talk about for the middle section of the chapter. It's just more examples of kind of how dark the chapter is. Ziggy is, I would say, definitely dead, which is a shame. He had a cool design. Oh, by the way, there's been some debate, mostly pure release, about the gender of these characters. I guess it's still not 100% certain. I'm just referring to them just with what sort of immediately came to mind, and if I'm wrong, then I apologize, and I'll change it, obviously in future discussion videos. So, Zelly is lost and hungry. I'm gonna go with Zelly from now on. Hold me to that, please. And they end up in the hands of human traffickers. Hooray. Then Wade shows up again, and presumably he used the same machine that they used to come to the human world. So take note of that Wade ended up in the same place as they did. Not a random thing. It did not randomly spit the kids out in Egypt, and I'm going to get to that later. So Zelly gets a big hero moment, which is really nice. It's always, obviously, you have to have us care about these new characters, even though we really want to see the old ones. She's not buckling, even after all the bad things in the world have happened to her, just like a real shonen hero. And then we get an even bigger hero moment with the introduction of Kyo, which is, I really love that. I love the focus on Kyo, period. I love that he's like almost a mythical figure to these kids, He's the person we're placing all our hope in. He's a human, but he can, the way it's described is that he can turn despair into hope. It's like almost a magical thing. It's like alchemical, the way they talk about it. I know that's silly to say, but that's like just the way that's phrased. Turning, what do they say alchemists can do? Turn salt into gold or whatever it is. And I just think that's really great. He gets a huge moment in the end in these wonderful color pages. And, Zatch Bell has always been about Momotos and humans and their partnership. And humans are just as strong whether they have fabulous answer talker powers or other weird unspecified powers or not. They are strong in their hearts and their minds. And that's what Zatch Bell has always been about. It's been about Momotos and humans and the partnership and what they each bring to that partnership. And so the focus on Kyo, the human, as being this hero that all the hope is held in is a great thing. And I do think that, the tone is going to level out after this. This was the despair. Kyo is here. Now it's time for the hope. So Kyo's appearance raises a few questions. First off, you might think, why is he in Egypt? That's random. I thought this. I know a few other people I talked to did. But what I quickly realized, and what I know other people also realize, is that it's really not random. Everything Egypt is associated with in pop culture, you think about mummies, pyramids, pharaohs, those are all archaeological discoveries. Kyo's father was an archaeologist, so Kyo is probably following in his father's footsteps. In that way, at least. Let's hope he doesn't follow in his father's footsteps in any other way. And he's in Egypt doing work. So, like I said before, the machine sent both Zelly and Wade to Egypt, where Kyo was, assuming Kyo didn't just fly there from some far-flung country when this Egyptian girl called him on the phone. Ziggy knew where Kyo was supposed to be. He programmed it into the machine. That's what we saw in his disembodied limbs somehow. I don't know how that worked, but it was really cool when they were typing. And then when Wade used the machine, he probably didn't know how to use it, but he was sent to the same place. So that brings up a really interesting question, which is how did the Momotos know where Kyo was in the human world? A friend of mine actually raised a really interesting possibility, which is that Kyo might have been making contact with the Momoto world, or even maybe more than just contact, before the events that we're seeing in this chapter. It's really not impossible. He might have been communicating with Zatch. I don't think any Momoto made the trip to Earth before these kids did, though I do think it would be really funny to have like a scene where Zelly is telling Kyo, like, look, I'm sorry, he was your partner, but the king, Zatch Bellies, he's dead. Zatch is dead. And then Zatch just walks into the room in the background, like rubbing his eyes, like we woke up from a nap. I don't think we're going to get a scene like that, but I do think it would be really funny. Um, and if Kyo has been making contact with the Momoto world, or the demon world, as the scans are calling it, it might explain how he's going to be able to stand up against this big monster wake. I don't really think he's going to be using like any new technology or whatever that he got from contact with the Momoto world. I think he'll probably just be using his wits and his answer talker, which is um, not an unheard of thing for Raikou, because that is how the protagonist of Vector Ball fights in the first couple chapters of that series. Protagonist of Vector Ball is like Kyo, sort of almost supernaturally smart. Specifically with measurements and physics, he can eyeball these very infinitesimal measurements, and he can use that to fight big monsters by like throwing desks at a monster in a specific way so the desks lock into each other and like trap the monster inside. That's something he does in the very first chapter of that series. So I wouldn't be surprised if we saw Kyo doing something like that with this big monster. Of course, he also has his answer talker to help. That's what I'm sort of thinking is going to happen in what we're going to get immediately in chapter 2. I think that we're going to get Kyo versus Wig. Kyo and the others are going to escape. Wig is not going to be defeated. He might be trapped under rubble or something. He might run out of transformation time. Maybe that's how it works. They're going to escape. We're going to get to a safe place. Then the exposition is going to happen. Probably 1 or 2 flashbacks. Then another fight with Wig, which is going to be like going into what the real fighting of the series is going to be like. Either Zelly is going to become able to use spells, either they have a cache of those spell elements, which people have noticed is something that Zeno actually does in the original series, sort of. He gives Gyaran, the Momoto, this lightning bolt in order to torture Cherish. Great. And it's very similar to the lightning bolt that we see a mysterious hand holding on the cover of this chapter. It would sort of make sense if maybe this was something that Momoto never needed to do during the first original series, because they could all use their powers very naturally. But Zeno was in possession of like a lot of weird esoteric Momoto knowledge. He could teleport, he could use his cloak, he could make a weird being out of his hair to deliver messages. It would make sense that he would know how to do that in the first series. Now, in the second series, there's been an attack on the Momoto world. Momoto has been massively depowered. It was maybe required for everyone to learn how to create these spell elements and share them with others so they could use spells. And the villains get a hold of some too, and they use them just because, I guess, they're big monsters. They can't do projectile moves like all of Momoto have. Something like that. So, I think that, like I said, it's possible that Zelly is going to get to use her own spell somehow. They're going to be able to use some of these spell elements, or they're just going to get help from another Momoto. Probably a character we know. We'll see. I think this is going to be a really awesome, and I would say somewhat excruciating ride to wait for all our favorite characters to show up month after month. But at the same time, I love that Raikou is doing this at his own pace. I think the freedom to create what he wants and how he wants is already showing in this chapter. It feels inspired. It feels like you feel the passion in it. So I'm really excited to see how that's going to roll out and how the story is going to go, even if we already have to wait another month for chapter 2. If that's what it takes, for Raikou to create the best story possible, then that's what all manga authors should have, is the time to not get burned out, not get exhausted, and create at their own pace how they want, what they want. So that's that. That's all I got to say. We're edging up on about 20 minutes now. If I think of anything else, I'll put it down in the description or the comments. But please let me know what you thought about the chapter, where you think the story might be going. I think it was a really intense, cool chapter with a really wonderful ending. And I will see you guys next month, hopefully with a better setup, maybe some kind of tripod for the phone or something like that, for chapter 2. See ya.